these movies are getting crazier and crazier. And in my own opinion, I'd have to say, I think that this film was arguably better than the first three. Arguably. Again, it's just an opinion. I know that with a lot of these types of movies, and most movies, franchises in general, where people always say the first one was always the best. And they'll say that for whether it's a horror film franchise or an action movie franchise. So whether it be a Scream or a Halloween or a Freddy or Jason, or whether it be a Mission Impossible or Fast and Furious or Taken, people always just have that automatic opinion that the first one is always the best simply because it is the first one. And a lot of times I tend not to go with that opinion. For some of them, I would say the first is the best. You know, Nightmare on Elm Street, I do think the first one, for that one, I think the first one was the best. Perfect 10. Now, with this movie here, I would say, again, this one right here so far, I would say this one was a little bit more attention grabbing for me. And I know I'm probably the last person in the universe, the last horror film fan in the universe to get to this movie series. I know I'm late. Don't ask why. But I would have to give this movie, because I think I gave the other movies, like on average, like 7 and 8. This one I can give this one 8, 8.5, maybe close to a 9. Now, the budget on this movie was $43 million. The box office was $187 million. So it did over 4 times its budget, which I always say is good for a horror film. Any type of horror film, really, whether it be a slasher film or just a psychological suspense or anything in between. I think they had a pretty all right cast. Nick Zano played Hunt. Bobby Campo as Nick. Shantel VanSanten as Lori. Haley Webb as Janet. Krista Allen as Samantha. McKelty Williamson as George. Stephanie Honoré as Nadia. And Andrew Fischella as, is it Fischella or Fischella? I always say there's always that one name I don't know how to pronounce. He played Andy. Now, the scores on this movie, I see a number of low scores here. I do see one relatively high score. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 27. Common Sense Media gave it a 40. Internet Movie Database gave it 51. And then among Google users, we have 62 to 82. So 82 is about the highest number you get out this movie here as far as those type of sources. And I'm going to do the usual, how Google breaks it down and then how Common Sense Media breaks it down. And I'm already predicting that there's probably more kids that gave their opinions of this movie than adults, which that's just so backwards. I don't know how that is. I'm not sure why. I don't get that. But while enjoying a day at the track, Nick O'Bannon has a horrific premonition of his friends and him all dying in a freak accident involving mini race cars. Mere seconds before the vision comes true, he manages to convince them to leave. Although they cheat death then, the survivors each begin to meet a grisly end, and Nick tries to figure out a way to escape a similar fate. Now, it says right here, so what is the message of Final Destination? And I think they were referring to the first movie, but this really applies to all of the movies. Now that I've finished all of them, and I'll get to the 5th movie in the next video. It's hard to say that many films have a purpose, but the main theme of these movies is that death comes for anyone, anytime and anywhere. Yeah, these movies have definitely proved that and have definitely demonstrated that. I mean, these things are just wild and bizarre, to say the least. I mean, when you look at the fatalities in here, I mean, it just kind of reminds me of some of the stuff I see in a violent video game. Like, it just reminds me of some Mortal Kombat type stuff where people are getting sliced in half and decapitated and just impaled and just all that type of stuff, burned alive or just whatever the case may be. Parents need to know, this is according to Common Sense Media, parents need to know that this 3D horror movie is full of bloody, bleak, and violent deaths, including dismemberment, disembowelment, explosions, impalements, brutal mutilations, crushing blows, and more. Lots of horror films do that, yes. And of course, 27 parents said X, Y, Z, and then 58 kids said X, Y, and Z. Again, this is definitely not a movie that I would have been allowed to watch or had a way to have access to when I was a kid. It's just how it was. But it doesn't matter now. We have this streaming services now. I can just pull up whatever we want at any time, and who cares? Now, how Comics Media breaks down the story, as in previous films, the fourth film begins with a vision as Nick joins his friends at an auto race and has a premonition of a horrible disaster that kills his friends and others. Snapping back to the present, Nick freaks out and gets his friends and some of the surrounding people to leave, meaning that they're saved when a crash does end up sending flaming debris flying into the stands. Spared, the group reflects on their good fortune and then start dying one by one. It seems death has a to-do list. Yeah, by the time I got to this movie, I was like, yeah, Death, the Grim Reaper just has a long list. And let me tell you, that guy's pretty busy. Even with 3D making, now it says, is it any good? Parents gave it a 3 out of 5. Kids give it a 3 out of 5. Even with 3D making for a unique viewing experience, the fact that the Final Destination 4 is a fairly dull affair, and the gloss of spilled blood can't make up for the dreary tedium of the film's central pitch. If death is coming and unavoidable, then watching these films mostly involves waiting for people to die with no hope of their salvation. The actors are all adequate, although one-time Oscar nominee Mykelti Williamson is far better than this material. And see, I don't know, that's the thing that bugs me, is that people say, oh, they don't need to be in this movie, they're better than this. Like, horror films are just always on the low end of the spectrum. It's like, oh, you don't need to do this. You can be in a Marvel or DC movie, or you can, play in some drama, at least a comedy drama or something. I don't know. These are all movies. They're all designed for entertainment, and the actors and actresses kind of just, go where they want to, or they have producers and directors and whatever reach out to them. And if they want to do it, let them do it. So it doesn't negate any of his talent. Director David R. Ellis knows what the fans of this series expect, and he doesn't fail to deliver the bloody accidents and deadly blows of the franchise. But he doesn't deliver anything else. Character development that would make us care about the people being killed, for instance, or twist in the narrative other than wondering when the next victim will die and how, which is intermittently amusing but not a foundation for a film, especially one we've seen 3 times before. At the very least, the 3D gimmick makes this film pop a little more than a conventional Part 4, but even the guts and gore leaping off screen can't make up for the way that this movie's story just lies there. Families can talk about the recent rise in 3D films. Is this a new way to return to the excitement of going to the theater in the age of fancy home theaters, or just a gimmick that's being exploited? I would go with the former rather than the latter, my opinion. How does the 3D affect the impact of the movie's gory, grisly murder scenes and other violence? I'll tell you right now, 3D has definitely made some horror films more enjoyable. I remember, and I'll do a review on this movie once I'm going to watch it again, because one of the next franchises I want to get to is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I remember being in theaters. That movie came out in 2013, I believe, and it was Texas Chainsaw 3D, and there was a heated scene where there was a huge fight or whatever was going on, and somebody, he threw the chainsaw at the screen, and everybody in the theater jumped. And so I think that just kind of adds to the intensity and just kind of it helps bring about that feeling of excitement and a thrill. And so I think that's why I think more and more films should do that. And I think that's the appeal of it, in my opinion. And I think this film was pretty all right for that. Now, the movies were available to watch on Max, but they just took them off. So I'm assuming the contract ended with, the production company that did this movie, New Line Cinema, Warner Brothers Pictures, Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, which, by the way, they have a contract with HBO Max as a whole. So I'm not really sure why they didn't leave them on there. And plus, this is a successful franchise. So beyond that, I would say I would give the movie, I think it's fair enough for me to give this movie a 9. Now, it's a little bit disappointing about what happened at the end, but I get why they did it the way they did it. So, and as far as the character development part, I think there was just enough to be able to care about some of the characters to a degree. Now, some of them you obviously didn't care about, but those main ones, it's a shame about what happened near the end. So, I know all the horror fans have seen it, but in case you didn't see it, I suggest checking out the first 3. I think I might add this franchise to my top 10 horror film franchises. Of course, there's not that many of them because the world only has, what, 10 horror films, and we got thousands of DC and Marvel movies, so it's not that hard to put top 10 horror films. So other than that, I got more coming. Like and subscribe.